Welcome, gentle soul, to another quiet visit with the past. In tonight's episode, we'll step into another world, familiar in its humanity, yet distant in time. Maybe you're listening as your thoughts begin to slow, or perhaps you're already resting with heavy eyes. However you found your way here, I'm thankful. I'd love to know where you're listening from and what time of day it is for you. The idea of this quiet story floating across the world always makes me smile. If these bedtime journeys through history bring you calm, don't forget to subscribe. There are so many more peaceful nights ahead. What I'm about to tell you sounds like pure fiction, but every single detail is documented historical fact. We're talking about a woman who went from performing in Constantinople's seediest entertainment venues to sitting on the throne of the most powerful empire on earth. And the journey between those 2 points. It's filled with political intrigue, religious controversy, and power moves that would make modern politicians blush. I'm talking about Theodora, and by the end of this series, you're going to understand exactly how she pulled off one of history's most incredible transformations. But here's the thing that makes this story absolutely fascinating. Most people think they know how power works in the ancient world. They imagine emperors making all the decisions while their wives sat quietly in the background, maybe influencing things behind the scenes. Theodora obliterated that entire playbook. But before we dive into the palace intrigue and the political masterstrokes, we need to start where it all began. Because understanding Theodora's rise means understanding just how impossible her journey should have been, according to every rule of Byzantine society. The year is around 500 AD, and Constantinople is the beating heart of the Byzantine Empire. This isn't just any city. This is the new Rome, the Christian capital that Emperor Constantine built to rival anything the old Roman Empire ever produced. The streets are filled with merchants from across the known world, the air thick with incense from countless churches, and the imperial palace complex sprawls across 7 hills like a city within a city. But Constantinople has another side, one that the imperial court pretends doesn't exist. In the entertainment district near the Hippodrome, where 90,000 screaming fans gather to watch chariot races, there's a different kind of theatre happening. This is where Theodora's story begins, in a world that respectable Byzantine society considers beneath contempt. Her father, Acacius, works as a bearkeeper for the Green faction at the Hippodrome. Now, you have to understand what this means in Byzantine culture. The circus factions aren't just sports teams. The Blues and the Greens are political powerhouses, almost like political parties with their own armies of supporters. These factions can make or break careers, start riots that burn down half the city, and even influence who become emperor. But being a bearkeeper, that's bottom-tier work. Acacius is responsible for training the bears that perform between chariot races, feeding them, making sure they don't maul the crowd. It's dirty, dangerous work that puts him barely above the level of slaves in Byzantine social hierarchy. And when Acacius dies while Theodora is still a child, her family's situation becomes desperate. Here's where the story takes a turn that would have scandalized every proper Byzantine family. Theodora's mother, faced with 3 young daughters and no source of income, makes a decision that will haunt Theodora's later political career. She puts her daughters on the stage. In 6th century Constantinople, actresses aren't like modern performers. They're considered barely a step above prostitutes. The line between entertainment and prostitution is deliberately blurred, and everyone knows it. Actresses perform in crude comedies, often appearing partially clothed or in sexually suggestive scenarios. They're expected to be available for wealthy patrons after shows. It's a world where survival often depends on your willingness to compromise your dignity. Theodora starts as the youngest member of this theatrical troupe, initially just carrying costumes and props for her older sisters. But even as a child, something sets her apart. Contemporary accounts describe her as strikingly beautiful, but more importantly, she possesses an intelligence that cuts through the crude entertainment world like a blade. As she grows older, Theodora doesn't just perform in these theatrical productions. She begins to master them. She understands that in a world where women have almost no official power, sexuality and wit become weapons of survival. But here's what makes Theodora different from every other actress struggling in Constantinople's entertainment district. She's not just surviving, she's studying. While other performers focus solely on pleasing their immediate audience, Theodora is watching the power dynamics in the crowd. She's learning which wealthy patrons have real influence, which ones are all show and no substance. She's developing an almost supernatural ability to read people, to understand their desires, their fears, their weaknesses. The theatrical world of Constantinople is brutal, but it's also a strange kind of education. Theodora is exposed to people from every level of society: wealthy merchants, minor court officials, foreign dignitaries, religious leaders who publicly condemn the theatre but privately attend performances. She's learning languages, picking up fragments of philosophy, theology, politics. Most importantly, she's learning how power really works, not from books or formal education, but from watching it in action. But the theatre world has its limitations, and Theodora quickly realizes that to truly escape her circumstances, she needs to aim higher. This is where her story takes another dramatic turn. She becomes the mistress of a minor official named Hesebulus, who's been appointed governor of Pentapolis in North Africa. Now, this might sound like a step up, and in some ways it is. Hesebulus provides Theodora with a taste of respectable society, a glimpse of how the other half lives. But it also becomes one of the most dangerous periods of her life, because Hesebulus isn't just any governor. He's a man with a violent temper and absolute power over his territory. The relationship starts well enough. Theodora gets to experience luxury for the first time in her life. She's living in a governor's palace, wearing expensive clothes, attended by servants. But she also discovers that trading sexual favors for security is a precarious business when your patron holds your life in his hands. The exact details of what happens in North Africa remain murky, but the outcome is clear. Hesebulus either tires of Theodora or she does something that enrages him. Either way, she finds herself cast out, stranded in a foreign land with no money, no protection, and no way to return to Constantinople. This is the moment that could have ended Theodora's story completely. She's hundreds of miles from home, in a region where her reputation means nothing, where she knows no one. For most women in her position, this would be a death sentence. But Theodora doesn't just survive the crisis. She uses it as an opportunity for complete reinvention. Here's where the story becomes almost mythical in its implications. Theodora doesn't immediately try to return to Constantinople. Instead, she travels to Alexandria, one of the great intellectual centers of the ancient world. And in Alexandria, something profound happens to her. She encounters Monophysite Christianity. Now you have to understand what a radical choice this is. The Byzantine Empire is officially Chalcedonian Christian, meaning they believe Christ has two natures, human and divine. Monophysites believe Christ has only one divine nature. This might sound like theological hair-splitting, but in the 6th century, this difference is worth going to war over. By embracing Monophysite Christianity, Theodora isn't just choosing a different religious interpretation. She's aligning herself with a movement that the imperial government considers heretical. She's making a political statement that will later have enormous consequences for the entire empire. But there's something deeper happening here. In Alexandria's monophysite community, Theodora discovers intellectual and spiritual resources that were completely unavailable to her in Constantinople's entertainment district. She's exposed to serious theological debate, to learned discussions about the nature of power, justice, and human dignity. For the first time in her life, she's in an environment where her intelligence is recognized and cultivated, rather than simply exploited. The woman who eventually returns to Constantinople is fundamentally different from the actress who left. She still possesses the street smarts and survival instincts that kept her alive in the theatre world, but now she also has something else: a coherent worldview, a sense of mission, and most dangerously, absolute confidence in her own abilities. She's also developed something that will prove crucial in the political battles ahead: a network of allies among the Monophysite community. These aren't just religious supporters. They're merchants, minor officials, intellectuals, people who exist on the margins of official Byzantine society, but who collectively wield significant influence. When Theodora arrives back in Constantinople, she's not returning as a failed actress seeking to rebuild her career. She's returning as a woman with a plan, and that plan involves nothing less than reshaping the empire itself. But first, she needs to find a way into the imperial court, and the path she chooses will shock everyone who thought they knew what she was capable of. The man who will become her ticket to ultimate power is already rising through the ranks of Byzantine politics. His name is Petrus Sabatius, but history will know him by his imperial name, Justinian. And when these two extraordinary individuals meet, the collision will send shockwaves through the ancient world that we're still feeling today. But that meeting and everything that follows from it is where our story really begins to accelerate into something that sounds too incredible to be true. The meeting between Theodora and Justinian happens in the most unlikely of circumstances, and it's a moment that will literally change the course of world history. But here's what makes this encounter so fascinating. When these two people first lay eyes on each other, neither one is anywhere close to the throne. Justinian is still just the nephew of Emperor Justin, a rising star in the imperial administration, but far from guaranteed power. And Theodora, she's a former actress trying to rebuild her life in a society that will never let her forget her past. But there's something electric about their first meeting. Contemporary sources describe it in terms that sound almost mythical. Justinian, who's already in his 30s and considered one of the most eligible bachelors in Constantinople, becomes completely obsessed with this woman who carries herself like she already owns the world. And here's what's absolutely mind-blowing about their relationship. This isn't some typical arrangement where a powerful man takes a beautiful mistress. From the very beginning, Justinian recognizes that Theodora possesses something he desperately needs: political instincts that are sharper than anyone else in the imperial court. Think about Justinian's position at this moment. He's brilliant, well-educated, deeply religious, and absolutely committed to restoring the Roman Empire to its former glory. But he's also bookish, sometimes indecisive, and he's never had to survive in the kind of brutal environment that forged Theodora's character. He knows law and theology and military theory. She knows people. Their partnership begins as a meeting of equals in a way that scandalized everyone around them. Justinian doesn't just fall in love with Theodora's beauty, he falls in love with her mind. And Theodora, who's spent her entire life reading people's motivations, recognizes that Justinian isn't just another wealthy patron. He's someone who might actually have the power to change the world, but there's a massive problem standing in their way. Byzantine law explicitly forbids senators from marrying actresses. This isn't just social disapproval. This is a legal barrier that makes their relationship impossible to formalize. And without marriage, Theodora can never be anything more than Justinian's mistress, no matter how much influence she wields behind the scenes. Here's where the story takes another incredible turn. Justinian doesn't just accept this legal barrier, he decides to destroy it. But to change the law, he needs imperial approval. And Emperor Justin has to be convinced that this isn't just his nephew's infatuation with a beautiful woman. This is a political necessity. The campaign to legalize their marriage becomes Theodora's first real test as a political operator. She can't approach Justin directly. That would be completely inappropriate and would probably backfire spectacularly. Instead, she has to work through intermediaries, building a coalition of support among people who have their own reasons for wanting to see the marriage laws changed. This is where Theodora's network from the Monophysite community becomes crucial. These aren't people with official power, but they're connected to merchant, minor officials, even some members of the palace staff. Theodora begins orchestrating a campaign that's invisible to most people in the imperial court, but incredibly effective. She also does something that shows just how sophisticated her political thinking has become. She doesn't argue for changing the law just for her benefit. Instead, she frames it as a broader issue of imperial mercy and Christian redemption. Why should past mistakes prevent someone from living a virtuous life? How can the empire claim to be Christian if it doesn't allow for forgiveness and transformation? The theological argument is particularly brilliant because it puts Justin in an impossible position. As a Christian emperor, he can't publicly argue against redemption and forgiveness. But Theodora goes even further. She begins living as if she's already the respectable woman she wants to become. She adopts a lifestyle of conspicuous virtue, supporting charities, attending church services, surrounding herself with scholars and theologians. This transformation isn't just for show. Theodora genuinely embraces this new identity, but she does it in a way that's strategically perfect. Every public appearance, every charitable act, every display of piety serves the dual purpose of genuine spiritual development and political positioning. The pressure on Justin builds gradually. It's not coming from one direction, but from multiple sources simultaneously. Palace officials mention how impressive Justinian's companion has become. Religious leaders note her devotion and charitable works. Even some senators begin suggesting that the marriage laws are perhaps too rigid for the Christian age, and then Justin makes the decision that changes everything. In 525 AD, he issues a decree allowing actresses to marry into the senatorial class, provided they have genuinely reformed their lives and renounced their former profession. The law is written in general terms, but everyone knows it's specifically designed to allow Justinian to marry Theodora. The wedding that follows is unlike anything Constantinople has ever seen. This isn't just a marriage ceremony, it's a political statement. Theodora, who grew up in the entertainment district carrying costumes for her sisters, walks down the aisle wearing imperial purple silk embroidered with gold thread. The ceremony takes place in the Hagia Sophia, the empire's most sacred church, and it's attended by the highest levels of Byzantine society. But here's what makes this wedding absolutely revolutionary. Justinian doesn't just marry Theodora and then expect her to fade into the background like a typical imperial wife. From day one of their marriage, she's his full partner in everything. She attends state meetings, offers advice on policy decisions, and gradually becomes recognized as the second most powerful person in the empire. This partnership becomes even more crucial when Justin dies in 527 AD and Justinian becomes emperor. But the transition isn't smooth because there are plenty of people in the imperial court who still see Theodora as an upstart actress who doesn't belong anywhere near the throne. The early years of Justinian's reign are marked by constant tension between traditional Byzantine nobility and this new power couple who seem determined to rewrite all the rules. Theodora's response to this opposition is masterful. Instead of trying to win over her critics, she builds her own power base. She creates a parallel court structure where she holds her own audiences, receives her own petitioners, and makes her own policy decisions. Anyone who wants to succeed in Justinian's empire quickly learns that they need Theodora's approval just as much as the emperor's. But the real test of their partnership comes in 532 AD with the Nika riots, an event that nearly destroys their reign before it can truly begin. The riots start as a typical factional dispute between the Blues and Greens at the Hippodrome, but they quickly spiral into something much more dangerous. The crowd begins chanting Nika, which means victory, but what they're really calling for is the overthrow of Justinian's government. The riots spread throughout Constantinople, burning down major buildings, including the original Hagia Sophia. The mob declares a new emperor, and marches on the imperial palace. Justinian's advisors panic and begin preparing for evacuation. The emperor himself starts considering abdication and flight to a safe harbor outside the city. This is the moment that defines Theodora's entire legacy. While everyone else in the imperial court is paralyzed by fear, she stands up and delivers what might be the most important speech in Byzantine history. But her words don't just save Justinian's throne, they reveal the full extent of her transformation from that young girl in the entertainment district to one of history's most formidable rulers. What she says in that moment and how she says it shows that everything that came before, every hardship and humiliation and struggle, was preparing her for exactly this crisis. Because while Justinian and his advisors are thinking like politicians, Theodora is thinking like someone who's fought for survival her entire life. And that difference in perspective is about to save the Byzantine Empire. The words she speaks will echo through history, but more importantly, the actions that follow will prove that her rise from the brothels to the throne isn't just an incredible personal story. It's the moment when the entire character of the Byzantine Empire changes forever. Because what happens next doesn't just keep Justinian on the throne, it launches the most ambitious and successful period of Byzantine expansion and cultural achievement in the empire's entire history. And at the center of it all is a woman who refused to accept that her origins determined her destiny. But before we hear those words that will echo through history, we need to understand exactly how desperate the situation has become. The Nika riots aren't just some angry crowd throwing stones. This is a full-scale revolution that's systematically dismantling everything Justinian has built. By the fifth day of rioting, half of Constantinople is in flames. The mob has already stormed the imperial palace once, forcing Justinian and Theodora to barricade themselves in the most secure sections. The senators who were supposed to support the emperor are nowhere to be found. Some have fled the city entirely. Others are quietly negotiating with the rioters, hedging their bets in case the imperial couple doesn't survive. Here's what makes this crisis so terrifying for Justinian. The rioters aren't just demanding his abdication. They've already chosen his replacement. They've declared Hypatius, a nephew of former Emperor Anastasius, as the new emperor. And Hypatius isn't refusing the crown. He's actually sitting in the imperial box at the hippodrome, wearing imperial regalia, accepting the acclamations of the crowd. This isn't a riot anymore. This is a successful coup in progress. Every hour that passes makes Justinian's position weaker and Hypatius's claim stronger. The imperial treasury is running low because tax collectors can't operate in a city under siege. The palace guard is outnumbered 50-1. And most crucially, Justinian is starting to lose his nerve. The emperor who dreamed of reconquering the Western Roman Empire is now huddled in his private chambers, listening to his advisors debate whether they should try to escape by sea or negotiate a safe passage out of the city. His grand vision of restoring Roman glory is crumbling into ash and smoke outside his windows. But while Justinian is paralyzed by the magnitude of the crisis, Theodora is doing what she's always done. She's reading the situation, identifying the real power dynamics, and formulating a plan. Because here's what everyone else in the palace is missing. The riots might look chaotic, but they're following patterns that Theodora recognizes from her days in the entertainment district. She understands crowd psychology in a way that none of Justinian's educated advisors do. She knows that mobs are dangerous, but also volatile. They can turn on their leaders just as quickly as they turned on the emperor. The key is understanding the right moment to act, and that moment is approaching fast. While the Imperial Council debates evacuation plans, Theodora is quietly meeting with Belisarius, Justinian's most trusted general. She's also speaking privately with Narcissus, the palace administrator who controls access to the imperial treasury. These aren't random conversations. She's building a coalition for a counterattack that nobody else has even considered possible. Here's where Theodora's background becomes absolutely crucial. Everyone else in the palace sees the rioters as an unstoppable force of nature. But Theodora sees them as she would see a hostile crowd at the theatre. Dangerous, yes, but manageable if you understand their weaknesses. And their biggest weakness is that they're not actually united in what they want beyond getting rid of Justinian. The blues and greens have temporarily allied against the emperor, but their underlying hatred for each other hasn't disappeared. The senators supporting Hypatius aren't really committed to him as a leader. They're just trying to position themselves advantageously for whatever comes next. The mob itself is held together by momentum and shared anger, but it has no coherent plan beyond destruction. Theodora recognizes that this apparent strength is actually a fatal vulnerability. The revolution looks unstoppable, but it's built on foundations that could collapse instantly if hit at the right points. The question is whether she can convince Justinian to stop running and start fighting. The moment of truth comes during what should be the final imperial council meeting before evacuation. Justinian's advisors are presenting their escape plans when Theodora asks to speak. And what happens next becomes one of the most quoted speeches in all of Byzantine history, not just because of the words themselves, but because of what those words accomplish. She doesn't start by arguing military strategy or political theory. Instead, she does something that cuts straight to the heart of who Justinian is as a man and as an emperor. She reminds him of something he's apparently forgotten in his panic. She reminds him what they've already sacrificed to get where they are. "My lords," she begins, "this is not the time for flight, even if flight would save us. Every man who has been born into this world must die, but one who has been emperor cannot endure to be a refugee. May I never be separated from this purple robe, and may I never live to see the day when those who meet me shall not address me as empress." But it's what comes next that reveals the full extent of her transformation and her understanding of power. She doesn't just appeal to Justinian's vanity or his sense of duty. She makes a calculation that shows she understands the political situation better than anyone else in the room. "If you wish to save yourself, Caesar, this is not hard. We have much money, there is the sea, here are boats. But think whether when you have been saved you would not gladly exchange that safety for death. As for me, I like a certain ancient saying that royalty is a good burial shroud." What she's doing here is brilliant beyond measure. She's not just shaming Justinian into staying and fighting. She's reframing the entire crisis. Instead of seeing this as a choice between certain death and possible escape, she's presenting it as a choice between dying as an emperor or living as a coward. But more than that, she's making a promise. By declaring that she will never live as anything other than an empress, she's telling Justinian that if he chooses to fight, he won't be fighting alone. The woman who climbed from the lowest depths of Byzantine society to the imperial throne is willing to risk everything she's gained, rather than give up what they've built together. The effect on the room is electric. Justinian's advisors, who moments before were debating escape routes, suddenly find themselves planning a counterattack. Because if this former actress is willing to die for the purple, how can they recommend that the emperor abandon his throne? But Theodora doesn't stop with inspiring speeches. The moment the council meeting ends, she puts her plan into action. And what follows is a masterclass in political and military strategy that saves not just Justinian's reign, but transforms the entire future of the Byzantine Empire. First, she sends secret messages to key leaders among both the blue and green factions. But here's the genius part. She doesn't send the same message to both groups. To the blues, she reminds them that Justinian has historically favored their faction and that Hypatius is more closely associated with the greens. To the greens, she points out that Hypatius is weak and indecisive, and that a successful emperor needs to be strong enough to protect their interests. These messages don't convert the faction leaders overnight, but they do something more important. They create doubt and confusion within the revolutionary coalition. Suddenly, blue and green leaders are wondering if they're on the right side, or if they should be hedging their bets. Meanwhile, Theodora is coordinating with Belisarius and Narcissus to position loyal troops around the hippodrome, but she's not planning a frontal assault that would turn Hypatius into a martyr. Instead, she's setting up what amounts to a massive trap. The plan she devises is audacious beyond belief. Rather than trying to break up the crowd from outside, she's going to let them gather in the hippodrome for Hypatius's coronation ceremony. And then, when they're all packed together in one location, celebrating what they think is their victory, Belisarius and his troops are going to strike. But the timing has to be perfect. Too early, and the crowd will disperse and continue the riots throughout the city. Too late, and Hypatius's coronation becomes legitimate in the eyes of the people. Theodora calculates that the optimal moment is right after Hypatius accepts the crown, but before the ceremony concludes. What happens next unfolds exactly as Theodora predicted. The crowd gathers in the hippodrome, over 30,000 people packed into the arena. Hypatius, wearing borrowed imperial regalia, is going through the motions of accepting the crown. The ceremony is reaching its climax when Belisarius strikes, but this isn't just a military operation. It's a psychological warfare campaign designed by someone who understands crowd dynamics better than any general in the Byzantine army. Belisarius doesn't just attack. He systematically cuts off every exit from the hippodrome, trapping the entire revolutionary leadership in one location. The massacre that follows is brutal and decisive. Contemporary sources report that over 30,000 people die in the hippodrome that day. But from Theodora's perspective, this isn't just about crushing the rebellion. It's about sending a message that will prevent future uprisings for generations. The speed and completeness of the victory shocks everyone, including Justinian's own supporters. In less than 6 hours, the revolution that seemed unstoppable has been completely destroyed. Hypatius is captured and executed. The factional leaders who organized the riots are dead or fleeing the city. The senators who were hedging their bets are suddenly competing to demonstrate their loyalty to Justinian. But here's what makes Theodora's victory even more impressive. She doesn't just crush the rebellion. She uses the aftermath to fundamentally restructure the power dynamics of the empire. With the old factional leadership eliminated, she creates new structures that make future revolts much more difficult to organize. The circus factions, which have been semi-independent political forces for centuries, are brought under direct imperial control. The senatorial class, which lost credibility by failing to support Justinian during the crisis, finds its traditional privileges curtailed. Most importantly, Theodora establishes her own intelligence network throughout Constantinople, ensuring that she'll know about future conspiracies long before they can threaten the throne. The woman who started as a powerless actress has just orchestrated one of the most successful counter-revolutions in Byzantine history. But what she does next proves that her ambitions extend far beyond just preserving Justinian's throne. She's going to use this victory as a launching pad for reforms that will reshape the entire empire. Because now that she's proven her political and military capabilities beyond any doubt, Theodora is ready to tackle the issues that brought her to power in the first place. The legal restrictions that once prevented her marriage to Justinian are just the beginning. She's about to launch a series of social and religious reforms that will fundamentally change what it means to be a woman, a slave, an actress, or a religious minority in the Byzantine Empire. And she's going to do it all while managing the most ambitious military expansion in Roman history since the days of Trajan. Because Justinian's dreams of reconquering the Western Empire haven't died. If anything, Theodora's successful handling of the Nika crisis has convinced him that together they can accomplish things that neither could achieve alone. The partnership that began with a controversial marriage is about to become one of the most transformative political alliances in world history. And at the center of it all is a woman who refused to let her origins define her limitations. The reforms that follow Theodora's triumph over the Nika riots reveal the true scope of her vision. This isn't just about securing power for herself and Justinian. She's methodically dismantling the social barriers that kept women like her trapped in cycles of exploitation and powerlessness. Her first target is the legal system itself. Working closely with Justinian's legal scholars, she begins crafting legislation that sounds almost impossible for the 6th century. Laws that give women the right to own property independently of their husbands. Regulations that make it illegal to force women into prostitution to pay off family debts. Legal protections for actresses and other entertainers that prevent them from being treated as sexual property. But here's what makes these reforms so brilliant. Theodora doesn't present them as radical feminist ideology. Instead, she frames them within existing Christian theology about human dignity and redemption. How can the empire claim to be truly Christian if it allows Christian women to be bought and sold like livestock? How can Byzantium call itself the heir to Rome if it treats half its population worse than the pagans did? The religious argument is particularly sophisticated because it puts her opponents in an impossible position. To argue against these reforms, they have to argue against core Christian principles. And Theodora has already established herself as a devoted Christian whose personal transformation proves that redemption is possible. Take her law regarding divorce, for example. Traditional Byzantine law heavily favored men in divorce proceedings. A man could divorce his wife for almost any reason, leaving her destitute and legally powerless. But a woman could only divorce under the most extreme circumstances, and even then, she typically lost everything. Theodora's reform creates a more balanced system where women can initiate divorce proceedings for legitimate grievances like adultery, abandonment, or physical abuse. More importantly, it ensures that divorced women retain some financial security and legal standing. The law doesn't make divorce easier, but it does make it less catastrophic for women. The reaction from traditional Byzantine nobility is predictably outraged. They see these reforms as a tax on the natural order of society. But Theodora has learned to anticipate this opposition, and she's prepared for it. Every major reform is accompanied by a carefully orchestrated campaign that demonstrates its practical benefits. When senators complain that allowing women to own property will destroy family stability, Theodora arranges for them to meet successful female merchants who've used their economic independence to strengthen their families. When religious leaders worry that protecting actresses will encourage immorality, she introduces them to former entertainers who've used legal protections to leave that life and become respectable wives and mothers. But her most audacious reform targets the institution of slavery itself. Now, Theodora doesn't abolish slavery outright. That would be politically impossible and economically devastating. But she does something almost as radical. She makes it significantly easier for slaves to buy their freedom, and she creates legal protections that prevent the worst abuses of the slave system. The law she's most proud of deals with something that hits close to her own experience. It becomes illegal to force free women into slavery to pay off debts. This might sound like a minor change, but in practice, it eliminates one of the primary ways that families like Theodora's ended up trapped in cycles of exploitation. Here's a specific example of how this law works in practice. A merchant named Marcus owes money to a wealthy senator. Under the old system, if Marcus couldn't pay, the senator could claim his daughters as slaves to work off the debt. Under Theodora's new law, that's completely illegal. The senator can still collect the debt through other means, but he can't enslave free citizens to do it. The impact of this single law is enormous because it eliminates the legal pathway that forced thousands of women into situations like Theodora's mother faced. No longer can desperate families be forced to choose between starvation and selling their daughters into entertainment or prostitution. But Theodora doesn't stop with legal reforms. She also uses her position to create new economic opportunities for women. She establishes workshops within the imperial palace where women can learn valuable skills like silk weaving, manuscript copying, and jewelry making. These aren't charity programs. They're serious training centers that produce goods for the imperial court and create sustainable careers for women who might otherwise have no options. One of her most successful projects involves the silk industry. Traditionally, silk production has been dominated by male craftsmen, but Theodora recognizes that women often have the fine motor skills and attention to detail that silk weaving requires. She establishes female-only workshops that quickly become some of the most productive in the empire. The women working in these workshops aren't just employees. They're partners in a business model that gives them a stake in the profits. As their skills improve and the workshops become more successful, the workers earn more money and gain more independence. Some eventually leave to start their own businesses, creating a multiplying effect that spreads economic opportunity throughout Constantinople. But here's what makes Theodora's economic programs so effective. She doesn't just create opportunities for women and then walk away. She actively mentors the most promising participants, teaching them the political and business skills they'll need to succeed in Byzantine society. Take the case of Anna, a former actress who becomes one of Theodora's most successful protégées. Anna starts in the silk workshops, but quickly demonstrates exceptional organizational abilities. Theodora takes her on as a personal assistant, gradually exposing her to the inner workings of imperial administration. Within 5 years, Anna is managing major imperial projects and advising other government officials. She eventually marries a minor court official and becomes an influential figure in her own right. But she never forgets where she came from, and she uses her position to create opportunities for other women following similar paths. This kind of mentorship becomes a hallmark of Theodora's approach to reform. She doesn't just change laws and create programs. She identifies talented individuals and personally invests in their success, creating a network of allies who share her vision and have the skills to implement it. Meanwhile, Justinian's military campaigns are reshaping the map of Europe and North Africa. His generals, led by the brilliant Belisarius, are systematically reconquering territories that the Western Roman Empire lost centuries ago. North Africa is liberated from Vandal control. Sicily falls to Byzantine forces. The Italian peninsula, including Rome itself, is brought back under imperial authority. But here's what most people don't realize about these military campaigns. Theodora isn't just supporting them from Constantinople. She's actively involved in the strategic planning, and her insights prove crucial to their success. Her experience in North Africa gives her knowledge about local conditions that proves invaluable when Belisarius is planning his campaign against the Vandals. She understands the political dynamics between different tribal groups, the economic resources available in various regions, and the religious tensions that can be exploited to Byzantine advantage. More importantly, she recognizes that military conquest is only the first step in successful expansion. The real challenge is integrating conquered territories into the empire in a way that makes them productive and loyal. And this is where her social reforms become strategically crucial. When Byzantine forces take control of new territories, they don't just impose military rule. They also implement Theodora's legal and social reforms, which often represent significant improvements over what local populations experienced under previous rulers. Women in former Vandal territories, for example, find themselves with legal protections and economic opportunities that they never had before. Former slaves discover pathways to freedom that didn't exist under previous regimes. Religious minorities, particularly Monophysite Christians, find themselves with greater tolerance and protection than they experienced under Orthodox rulers. These reforms aren't just morally commendable, they're strategically brilliant because they give conquered populations reasons to support Byzantine rule beyond mere military intimidation. People who benefit from imperial reforms become stakeholders in the empire's success rather than reluctant subjects planning rebellion. But Theodora's most controversial reform deals with religious policy, and it's here that her personal faith journey becomes politically crucial. Remember, she embraced monophysite Christianity during her time in Alexandria, and she never abandoned those beliefs even after marrying Justinian. This creates a fascinating dynamic within the imperial court. Justinian is officially Orthodox, following the Chalcedonian interpretation that Christ has both human and divine natures. Theodora privately supports the monophysite position that Christ has only one divine nature. In most marriages, this would be a source of constant conflict. In their partnership, it becomes a strategic advantage. Here's why this religious difference works to their benefit. The Byzantine Empire includes millions of monophysite Christians, particularly in Egypt and Syria. These populations have often felt marginalized by Orthodox imperial policy, creating persistent sources of unrest and rebellion. By having Theodora quietly support monophysite positions while Justinian maintains Orthodox credentials, the imperial couple can appeal to both religious communities simultaneously. Orthodox Christians see Justinian as their defender, while monophysites see Theodora as their advocate within the imperial court. This balancing act requires incredible political skill because both communities are watching carefully for signs of betrayal or favoritism. Theodora has to support monophysite interests without openly contradicting imperial religious policy. Justinian has to maintain orthodox positions without completely alienating his wife's religious allies. The solution they develop is characteristically sophisticated. Publicly, the empire maintains orthodox religious policy, but privately, Theodora uses her influence to protect monophysite leaders from persecution and to ensure that monophysite communities have access to imperial resources and opportunities. She also does something even more clever. She begins hosting theological debates in the imperial palace, where Orthodox and monophysite scholars can present their positions in a respectful, intellectual environment. These debates don't resolve the theological differences, but they do create a culture of dialogue rather than persecution. The impact of this policy is enormous. Religious tensions that previously led to riots and rebellions are channeled into scholarly discussions. Monophysite communities that might otherwise support separatist movements instead focus their energy on participating in these theological debates and building relationships with imperial authorities. But perhaps Theodora's most personal reform involves the entertainment industry that shaped her early life. She doesn't try to eliminate theatre and entertainment from Byzantine culture. Instead, she works to eliminate the exploitation and degradation that made her own childhood so traumatic. New laws require that entertainers be paid fair wages and work under safe conditions. Contracts that essentially sold performers into sexual slavery are declared illegal. Most importantly, children can no longer be forced into entertainment careers to pay off family debts. She also creates alternative career paths for people trying to leave the entertainment industry. The workshops and training programs she establishes specifically recruit former actors and actresses, giving them skills and opportunities that can lead to respectable careers. The transformation of Constantinople's entertainment district becomes one of Theodora's most visible successes. The same neighborhoods that once symbolized exploitation and desperation gradually become centers of legitimate commerce and skilled craftsmanship. But not everyone appreciates these changes. Traditional Byzantine elites see Theodora's reforms as attacks on their privileges and power. They can't directly challenge the empress, but they can and do work to undermine her initiatives through bureaucratic resistance and quiet sabotage. The opposition Theodora faces is sophisticated and persistent. Senators who publicly support her reforms privately instruct their subordinates to implement them as slowly and ineffectively as possible. Religious leaders who can't openly oppose her theological debates work to exclude monophysite scholars from participating. Government officials who depend on imperial favor for their careers find ways to delay and complicate the programs she champions. Theodora's response to this resistance reveals just how much she's learned about wielding power effectively. She doesn't waste energy trying to convert her opponents or win them over with logical arguments. Instead, she systematically replaces them with people who share her vision and have the competence to implement it. This isn't a purge in the traditional sense. She doesn't execute or exile her opponents. Instead, she uses the normal processes of imperial administration to promote allies and marginalize enemies. Officials who resist her reforms find themselves transferred to less important positions. Bureaucrats who support her programs receive promotions and increased responsibilities. Over time, the imperial administration becomes filled with people who either genuinely support Theodora's vision or at least understand that their career advancement depends on implementing it effectively. The result is that her reforms don't just exist on paper. They actually transform daily life throughout the empire. By 540 AD, just over a decade after the Nika riots, the Byzantine Empire looks fundamentally different from what it was when Justinian and Theodora came to power. Militarily, it has expanded to include much of the former Western Roman Empire. Economically, it's more prosperous and diverse than it's been in centuries. Socially, it offers opportunities and protections for women, slaves, and religious minorities that are unprecedented in the ancient world. But the most remarkable transformation is in the character of imperial leadership itself. The partnership between Justinian and Theodora has created a new model of shared power that maximizes both of their strengths while compensating for their individual weaknesses. Justinian provides the legal expertise, military strategy, and institutional knowledge needed to run a vast empire. Theodora contributes the political instincts, social awareness, and practical wisdom needed to understand how policies affect real people's lives. Together, they've accomplished things that neither could have achieved alone. The legal code that Justinian develops becomes one of the foundation documents of Western civilization, but it's infused with Theodora's insights about social justice and human dignity. The military campaigns that restore imperial control over former Roman territories succeed partly because Theodora's reforms make conquered populations willing partners rather than hostile subjects. Most importantly, they've proven that power sharing between equals can be more effective than traditional autocratic rule. This isn't just a personal arrangement between husband and wife. It's a new model of governance that influences how the Byzantine Empire operates for generations. But their greatest challenges still lie ahead. The plague that will devastate the ancient world is approaching. Military campaigns in Italy are about to bog down in costly sieges and guerrilla warfare. Religious controversies that seemed resolved will flare up again with new intensity. And through it all, Theodora will continue to be the target of critics who can never accept that a former actress has become one of history's most effective rulers. The whispers about her past will never completely disappear, and her enemies will continue looking for ways to use her origins against her. But by now, those attacks have lost most of their power. Theodora's accomplishments speak louder than her critics' complaints. The laws she's written, the institutions she's built, the people she's helped, and the empire she's helped transform provide overwhelming evidence that her rise to power wasn't just personal triumph. It was exactly what the Byzantine Empire needed to reach its greatest heights. The girl who once carried costumes in Constantinople's entertainment district has become the architect of social reforms that will influence legal systems for over 1,000 years. The woman who was once considered unfit for respectable society has proven that respectability is something you earn through your actions, not something you inherit through your birth. And the partnership she's built with Justinian is about to face its ultimate test, as external pressures and internal challenges threaten to undo everything they've accomplished together. The plague arrives in Constantinople like a thief in the night, and it changes everything. We're talking about 541 AD, and what historians will later call the Plague of Justinian is about to become one of the deadliest pandemics in human history. But here's what makes this crisis absolutely fascinating from Theodora's perspective. While everyone else in the imperial court is panicking about the disease itself, she's already calculating how this catastrophe will reshape the political landscape of the entire empire. The plague doesn't discriminate. It kills rich and poor, orthodox and heretical, loyal citizens and potential rebels with equal efficiency. But Theodora recognizes something that her advisors miss completely. This isn't just a medical crisis. It's an opportunity to implement reforms that would have been politically impossible under normal circumstances. Think about it from her perspective. The traditional power structures that have resisted her social programs are suddenly disrupted. Wealthy families that controlled key industries for generations find themselves without heirs. Government positions that were passed down like family property are suddenly vacant. Most importantly, the survival crisis creates a situation where practical solutions matter more than traditional prejudices. Theodora doesn't waste a single day adapting to this new reality. While Justinian focuses on managing the immediate medical emergency, she begins restructuring imperial administration to account for the massive personnel losses. But she doesn't just fill vacant positions with whoever is available. She uses this crisis as an opportunity to promote people who share her vision and have demonstrated competence in implementing her reforms. Take the case of Marcus Aurelius, not the famous emperor, but a minor tax collector who caught Theodora's attention during the economic programs she established for women. Marcus had shown exceptional skill in organizing the silk workshops, and he developed innovative methods for ensuring that female workers received fair compensation for their labor. Under normal circumstances, Marcus would never have been considered for a major government position. He comes from a middle-class family with no political connections, and his primary qualification is practical competence rather than aristocratic bloodline. But when the plague creates a vacancy in the imperial treasury department, Theodora doesn't hesitate to promote him. The results are exactly what she expected. Marcus brings the same innovative thinking and attention to detail that made him successful in the workshops to his new position in the treasury. Within months, he's developed new systems for collecting taxes that are more efficient and less corrupt than the traditional methods. More importantly, he implements these systems in a way that reflects Theodora's priorities about social justice and economic opportunity. This pattern repeats itself throughout the imperial administration. The plague creates opportunities, and Theodora fills them with people who understand that competence and loyalty matter more than family connections. The result is that the imperial government becomes more effective and more responsive to her reform agenda than it ever was before the crisis. But the plague also creates challenges that test every aspect of Theodora's political skills. The massive death toll disrupts trade networks that the empire depends on for economic stability. Entire industries collapse when key craftsmen and merchants die without passing on their knowledge to apprentices. Most dangerously, the social disruption creates perfect conditions for religious extremists and political opportunists to challenge imperial authority. Theodora's response to these challenges reveals just how sophisticated her understanding of power has become. She doesn't try to control everything directly. Instead, she creates systems that can function effectively, even when she can't personally supervise every detail. Her approach to the economic crisis is particularly brilliant. Rather than trying to prop up failing industries with government subsidies, she uses the disruption as an opportunity to diversify the imperial economy. The silk workshops she established for women become models for new industries that can adapt quickly to changing circumstances. But here's what makes her economic strategy so effective. She doesn't just create new businesses. She creates new types of business relationships that are more resilient than traditional models. The profit-sharing arrangements she developed in the silk workshops spread to other industries, creating economic partnerships where workers have real stakes in their company's success. This approach proves crucial when traditional trade networks collapse due to plague disruptions. Instead of having a few wealthy merchants controlling entire industries, the empire now has networks of smaller businesses that can adapt quickly to new opportunities. When Mediterranean trade routes become unreliable, these smaller enterprises develop alternative supply chains and new markets. The religious challenges created by the plague are even more complex. When people are dying by the thousands, theological debates about the nature of Christ suddenly seem less important than finding someone to blame for the catastrophe. Both Orthodox and Monophysite communities include extremists who see the plague as divine punishment for tolerating the other side's heretical beliefs. Theodora's solution to this problem demonstrates her genius for turning potential disasters into strategic advantages. Instead of choosing sides or trying to suppress religious tensions, she channels them into constructive competition. She announces that both Orthodox and Monophysite communities can compete to demonstrate their Christian virtue through charitable works and medical care for plague victims. Whichever community provides more effective relief will obviously have God's favor, and their theological position will be vindicated by their actions rather than their arguments. The results are extraordinary. Orthodox and Monophysite Christians begin competing to establish hospitals, distribute food to starving families, and care for plague orphans. The theological debates continue, but they're now accompanied by practical demonstrations of Christian charity that benefit the entire population. More importantly, this competition creates a new model for religious coexistence. Instead of trying to suppress each other through persecution or political manipulation, the communities learn to compete through positive contributions to society. The theological differences don't disappear, but they become less threatening when both sides are focused on helping plague victims rather than attacking each other. But Theodora's most personal challenge during the plague involves Justinian himself. In 542 AD, the emperor contracts the disease and nearly dies. For several weeks, he's delirious with fever, unable to participate in government decisions or even recognize the people around him. This crisis tests everything Theodora has built over the previous 15 years. Officially, she has no constitutional authority to rule the empire in Justinian's absence. Byzantine law doesn't recognize the concept of a female regent, and there are plenty of people in the imperial court who would love to use Justinian's illness as an opportunity to challenge her influence. Her response to this constitutional crisis reveals the full extent of her transformation from that actress in Constantinople's entertainment district. She doesn't try to claim formal authority that she doesn't legally possess. Instead, she exercises actual power so effectively that formal authority becomes irrelevant. Working through the network of allies she's built throughout the imperial administration, Theodora ensures that government continues functioning as if nothing has changed. Tax collection continues, military campaigns proceed according to plan, and her social reform programs expand even faster than before. But she does this in a way that's politically brilliant. Every major decision is officially made by imperial councils acting in Justinian's name. Theodora never claims to be ruling the empire herself. She's simply ensuring that the emperor's known wishes are carried out while he recovers from his illness. The fiction is transparent to everyone involved, but it's also politically necessary. By maintaining the appearance that Justinian remains in charge, Theodora prevents a constitutional crisis that could destabilize the entire empire. At the same time, she demonstrates that her influence doesn't depend on her husband's physical presence. The system she's built and the relationships she's cultivated can function independently of any single person, including herself. When Justinian finally recovers, he finds that the empire has not only survived his absence, but actually grown stronger during the crisis. The plague response has been more effective than anyone expected. The economic disruptions have been managed without major social unrest. Most remarkably, the religious tensions that threatened to tear the empire apart have been channeled into constructive competition that strengthens both communities. But Justinian's illness also creates a new dynamic in their partnership. For the first time, he's experienced firsthand how effectively Theodora can manage the empire without his direct involvement. This doesn't diminish his role as emperor, but it does change how he thinks about their collaboration. The result is that their power-sharing arrangement becomes even more sophisticated. Instead of Theodora working behind the scenes while Justinian maintains public authority, they begin operating as genuine co-rulers. Major policy decisions are made jointly, and both of them take public responsibility for the results. This evolution in their partnership comes at exactly the right moment, because the empire is about to face challenges that will require every bit of their combined expertise. The military campaigns in Italy are becoming more complex and expensive than anyone anticipated. The Ostrogothic resistance is proving more resilient than Belisarius expected, and the Italian population is beginning to see Byzantine liberation as just another foreign occupation. Meanwhile, the Persian Empire is taking advantage of Byzantine focus on the west to launch new attacks on the eastern frontier. King Khosrow is no fool, and he recognizes that Justinian's resources are stretched thin between plague recovery, Italian campaigns, and internal reforms. But the most dangerous challenge comes from an unexpected source. Within the Byzantine court itself, a group of senators and military commanders begins plotting to remove both Justinian and Theodora from power. These aren't the same nobles who opposed them during the early years of their reign. This is a new generation of conspirators who've learned from the failures of previous attempts. The conspiracy that emerges in 543 AD is more sophisticated than anything they've faced before. Instead of trying to organize mass riots like the Nika conspirators, this group plans a surgical coup that would eliminate the imperial couple while maintaining the appearance of legitimate succession. Their plan involves three coordinated elements. First, they'll assassinate both Justinian and Theodora simultaneously, preventing either one from rallying supporters or organizing resistance. Second, they'll immediately proclaim a new emperor from among the traditional senatorial families, giving the coup an appearance of constitutional legitimacy. Third, they'll reverse the most controversial social reforms while maintaining the popular economic and military policies. It's a sophisticated plan that addresses the weaknesses of previous conspiracies, but the conspirators make one crucial mistake. They underestimate how effectively Theodora's intelligence network has penetrated every level of Byzantine society. The woman who once survived by reading the intentions of hostile crowds in Constantinople's entertainment district has built an information-gathering system that would impress modern intelligence agencies. Her network includes servants in noble households, clerks in government offices, merchants who travel between cities, and even priests who hear confessions from potential conspirators. When the conspiracy begins forming, Theodora knows about it almost immediately. But instead of moving to crush it right away, she does something characteristically subtle. She allows the conspiracy to develop while carefully monitoring its progress, learning who's involved and how they plan to execute their coup. This patient approach serves multiple purposes. First, it allows her to identify all the participants rather than just the obvious leaders. Second, it gives her time to prepare countermeasures that will be devastatingly effective. Most importantly, it allows her to choose the optimal moment to act, when the conspiracy is fully formed, but before it can actually threaten imperial security. The moment she chooses to strike reveals her complete mastery of political timing. The conspirators have scheduled their coup for a religious festival, when both Justinian and Theodora will be attending public ceremonies at the Hagia Sophia. They plan to use the crowd and the ceremonial confusion to cover their assassination attempt. But Theodora turns their own plan against them. On the morning of the festival, imperial guards quietly arrest every conspirator simultaneously. The arrests happen so quickly and efficiently that none of the plotters have time to warn the others or activate emergency plans. But here's what makes Theodora's response truly masterful. She doesn't just crush the conspiracy, she uses it as an opportunity to demonstrate the strength and effectiveness of her reformed imperial administration. The trials of the conspirators become public demonstrations of how Byzantine justice should work. Instead of secret executions or arbitrary punishment, each conspirator receives a fair trial where evidence is presented and legal procedures are followed. The proceedings are open to the public, allowing ordinary citizens to see that imperial justice applies equally to senators and commoners. Most importantly, the punishments fit the crimes and serve broader political purposes. The ringleaders are executed, but their families aren't persecuted or stripped of their property. Minor participants receive lesser sentences that allow for eventual rehabilitation and return to productive citizenship. The message Theodora sends is clear and sophisticated. The imperial government is strong enough to detect and defeat any conspiracy, but it's also just enough to punish only the guilty and merciful enough to allow for redemption and second chances. The successful crushing of this conspiracy marks a turning point in how both the imperial court and the general population view Theodora's role in the empire. The woman who was once criticized as an upstart actress has now demonstrated her ability to outmaneuver the most sophisticated political operators in Byzantine society. But more than that, she's proven that her reforms haven't weakened the empire. If anything, they've made it stronger and more resilient. The intelligence network that detected the conspiracy exists because she created opportunities for people from all social levels to participate in imperial administration. The justice system that handled the trials fairly reflects her influence on Byzantine legal development. By 545 AD, even Theodora's harshest critics have to acknowledge that her partnership with Justinian has created the most successful period in Byzantine history since the height of the original Roman Empire. The military campaigns have restored imperial control over much of the Mediterranean. The plague has been managed more effectively than anyone thought possible. The social reforms have created new sources of economic growth and political stability. But perhaps, most importantly, the imperial government itself has been transformed into something more effective and more just than any previous iteration. The bureaucratic reforms, the legal changes, the economic innovations, and the social programs have created a system that serves the empire's citizens rather than just its elite. This transformation becomes crucial as the empire faces its next major challenge. The Gothic War in Italy is about to enter its most difficult phase, requiring military and economic resources on a scale that would have bankrupted previous imperial administrations. But the reformed Byzantine system that Theodora helped create is strong enough and flexible enough to meet this challenge while continuing to expand and improve. The woman who began her journey in the shadows of Constantinople's entertainment district has become the architect of imperial reforms that will influence European civilization for over 1,000 years. But her story is far from over. The greatest tests of her political genius are still ahead, and final chapters of her remarkable transformation are about to unfold. What happens next will prove that Theodora's rise from the brothels to the throne wasn't just an incredible personal achievement. It was exactly what the Byzantine Empire needed to become the greatest power in the medieval world. The Gothic War in Italy becomes Theodora's ultimate masterclass in strategic thinking, but not in the way anyone expects. While Justinian and his generals focus on military tactics and territorial conquest, Theodora recognizes something that will prove absolutely crucial to the campaign's success. This isn't just about defeating Gothic armies. This is about winning the loyalty of Italian populations who've been ruled by foreign powers for over a century. Here's where her background becomes strategically invaluable once again. Theodora understands what it's like to be powerless in a system controlled by people who see you as expendable. She knows how ordinary people think when they're caught between competing authorities, and she uses that knowledge to develop a completely different approach to conquest than anything the Byzantine Empire has attempted before. Instead of simply imposing imperial rule on conquered Italian cities, she implements a strategy of integration that makes Byzantine control attractive to local populations. The legal reforms she developed in Constantinople are adapted for Italian circumstances, providing protections and opportunities that Italians haven't experienced under Gothic rule. Take the city of Naples, which falls to Belisarius in 536 AD. Under normal circumstances, conquest means exploitation. The victorious army loots the city, imposes heavy taxes, and treats the population as a resource to be extracted from, rather than citizens to be served. But Theodora's approach is radically different. Within weeks of the city's capture, Byzantine administrators are implementing legal protections for women, creating economic opportunities for skilled craftsmen, and establishing the same profit-sharing workshops that proved so successful in Constantinople. The results are extraordinary. Instead of sullen resistance from a conquered population, Naples becomes a model of enthusiastic collaboration. Local merchants begin actively supporting Byzantine supply lines. Italian craftsmen volunteer to work on imperial construction projects. Most importantly, Naples becomes a recruitment center where Italians join Byzantine forces fighting against Gothic resistance. This pattern repeats itself throughout the Italian campaign. Cities that surrender to Byzantine forces discover that imperial rule offers tangible benefits that Gothic authority never provided. Women gain legal rights they never possessed before. Slaves find pathways to freedom that didn't exist under previous regimes. Religious minorities receive protections that allow them to practice their faith without persecution. But Theodora's Italian strategy goes deeper than just offering better government services. She recognizes that successful integration requires creating emotional connections between conquered populations and imperial authority. And she does this through something that sounds almost modern in its sophistication: cultural exchange programs. Young Italians who demonstrate exceptional abilities are brought to Constantinople for education and training in imperial administration. They return to Italy not just as Byzantine officials, but as cultural ambassadors who understand both societies intimately. Similarly, promising young Byzantines are sent to Italian cities to learn local languages, customs, and economic practices. The result is the creation of a genuinely integrated imperial system rather than just an occupying force. Italian cities don't just submit to Byzantine authority, they become active participants in imperial expansion and governance. Meanwhile, Theodora is managing an even more complex challenge back in Constantinople. The massive resources required for the Italian campaign are straining the imperial treasury, and she needs to find ways to finance the war without crushing the economic recovery from the plague. Her solution demonstrates the same innovative thinking that characterized her social reforms. Instead of simply raising taxes, which would stifle economic growth, she creates new forms of public-private partnership that allow wealthy individuals and institutions to invest in imperial expansion while receiving reasonable returns on their investments. Here's how it works in practice. Wealthy merchants can purchase government bonds that finance specific military campaigns or infrastructure projects. The bonds pay competitive interest rates, but they also give investors direct stakes in the success of imperial policies. If a military campaign succeeds and captures valuable territory, bondholders receive bonus payments from the resulting economic activity. This system accomplishes multiple objectives simultaneously. It provides the government with necessary capital without imposing crushing tax burdens on ordinary citizens. It gives wealthy individuals productive ways to support imperial expansion rather than just hoarding their wealth. Most importantly, it creates a broad coalition of people who have financial incentives to support imperial success rather than just hoping for it. But the system also reflects Theodora's deeper understanding of how power really works in complex societies. By giving wealthy investors direct stakes in imperial success, she ensures that potential opposition leaders have more to gain by supporting her policies than by resisting them. Take the case of Senator Maximus, a traditional aristocrat who initially opposed many of Theodora's social reforms. Maximus comes from a family that's controlled shipping interests in the Black Sea for generations, and he sees imperial expansion as a threat to his established business relationships. Under normal circumstances, Maximus would be a natural leader of aristocratic opposition to expensive military campaigns. But Theodora's investment system gives him an opportunity to profit from imperial expansion rather than just pay for it. His shipping expertise becomes valuable for moving supplies to Italian campaigns, and his Black Sea connections provide access to resources that the imperial military desperately needs. Within 2 years, Maximus has transformed from potential opponent to active collaborator. He's not just investing in imperial bonds, he's using his shipping network to support military logistics, and he's recruiting other merchants to participate in the investment system. This transformation isn't just about individual conversions. It represents a fundamental shift in how the imperial elite relates to government policy. Instead of seeing imperial expansion as something that benefits the emperor at their expense, they begin to see it as a collaborative enterprise where everyone's success depends on everyone else's contributions. The cumulative effect of these financial innovations is that the Italian campaign becomes self-sustaining in ways that previous military expansions never achieved. Instead of draining imperial resources, the campaign generates new sources of wealth that fund further expansion and domestic improvements. But Theodora's most remarkable achievement during this period involves something that seems almost impossible for the 6th century. She begins implementing what amounts to an imperial foreign aid program. It's the context that makes this so extraordinary. The plague hasn't just affected the Byzantine Empire, it's devastated populations throughout Europe and North Africa, creating humanitarian crises that threaten to destabilize entire regions. Traditional imperial policy would focus exclusively on Byzantine interests, perhaps offering assistance to potential allies, but certainly not providing aid to neutral or potentially hostile populations. But Theodora recognizes that humanitarian crises create opportunities for both moral leadership and strategic advantage. Her approach is characteristically sophisticated. Instead of just sending food and medical supplies to plague-affected regions, she creates programs that address the underlying causes of vulnerability while demonstrating Byzantine competence and generosity. Take her response to the crisis in southern Gaul, where Frankish territories have been devastated by both plague and civil war. Traditional Byzantine policy would either ignore the situation or try to exploit it for territorial gain. But Theodora develops a different strategy. She sends medical experts and administrators to help organize plague relief efforts. But these aren't just humanitarian volunteers. They're carefully selected individuals who can demonstrate the effectiveness of Byzantine administrative methods while providing genuine assistance. The Frankish leaders who receive this aid are impressed not just by Byzantine generosity, but by the competence and efficiency of imperial administration. They see firsthand how Theodora's reformed government can respond quickly and effectively to complex crises. The result is that Frankish territories become informal allies rather than potential threats. When other powers threaten Byzantine interests, Frankish leaders who benefited from imperial aid programs provide diplomatic support and sometimes even military assistance. This pattern repeats throughout the Mediterranean world. Theodora's humanitarian programs create networks of goodwill and cooperation that strengthen imperial security without requiring expensive military commitments. But perhaps her most audacious project during this period involves something that won't be attempted again for over 1,000 years. She begins establishing what amount to international schools where young people from different cultures can study together and learn from each other. The concept emerges from her experience with the cultural exchange programs in Italy, but she expands it to include students from throughout the known world. Young Persians, Franks, Vandals, Goths, and representatives from dozens of other cultures come to Constantinople to study alongside Byzantine and Italian students. The curriculum isn't just academic. Students learn languages, study different religious and philosophical traditions, and participate in practical training programs that teach valuable skills like engineering, medicine, and administration. But the real purpose of these schools is to create a generation of leaders who understand multiple cultures and can serve as bridges between different societies. When these students return to their home countries, they carry with them not just knowledge and skills, but personal relationships and cultural understanding that can prevent conflicts and facilitate cooperation. The long-term impact of this program is enormous. 20 years later, when diplomatic crises arise between the Byzantine Empire and neighboring powers, the negotiations often involve people who studied together in Theodora's international schools. Personal relationships that were formed during student years become foundations for political agreements that might otherwise be impossible to achieve. Meanwhile, the military situation in Italy is reaching a critical turning point. The Gothic resistance, led by the brilliant King Totola, has proven far more resilient than anyone expected. Instead of collapsing after a few decisive defeats, Gothic forces have adapted to Byzantine tactics and begun waging an effective guerrilla campaign that threatens to undo all of Belisarius's earlier conquests. But here's where Theodora's comprehensive approach to conquest proves its value. While Gothic forces can challenge Byzantine armies on the battlefield, they can't compete with the integrated political, economic, and cultural programs that have won the loyalty of Italian populations. Cities that have experienced the benefits of Byzantine rule don't switch sides when Gothic armies approach. Instead, they actively resist Gothic attempts to retake control. Italian recruits who've joined Byzantine forces fight with the enthusiasm of people defending their own interests rather than just following orders from foreign commanders. Most importantly, the intelligence network that Theodora has helped establish throughout Italy provides Byzantine commanders with detailed information about Gothic movements and plans. Local populations who benefit from imperial rule become voluntary intelligence agents who report on enemy activities and help coordinate resistance to Gothic operations. The result is that what should have been a devastating Gothic revival becomes instead an opportunity to demonstrate the superiority of Byzantine integration strategies over traditional conquest methods. Instead of losing ground to Gothic resistance, imperial forces actually expand their control while strengthening their relationships with local populations. By 547 AD, it's clear that the Italian campaign is going to succeed, not just militarily, but politically and culturally. The Italian peninsula isn't just being conquered, it's being transformed into an integral part of a reformed Byzantine empire that offers opportunities and protections that no previous imperial system ever provided. But the success of the Italian campaign creates new challenges for Theodora back in Constantinople. The massive expansion of imperial territory and population requires corresponding expansion of administrative capacity, legal systems, and economic infrastructure. More importantly, success brings scrutiny from other powers who are beginning to recognize that the Byzantine Empire under Justinian and Theodora represents a fundamentally new type of threat. This isn't just another imperial expansion that can be contained through traditional military and diplomatic means. This is the emergence of a political system that can win popular loyalty and cultural influence in ways that make conventional resistance strategies ineffective. The Persian Empire, in particular, begins to understand that the Byzantine expansion represents an existential challenge to traditional imperial methods throughout the ancient world. If Theodora's integration strategies prove successful in Italy, they could be applied anywhere, potentially transforming the entire balance of power in Europe and Asia. King Khosrow's response to this threat will test every aspect of the political and military systems that Justinian and Theodora have built together. but it will also provide the ultimate demonstration of how completely the former actress has transformed herself and her empire. The woman who once survived by reading hostile crowds in Constantinople's entertainment district is about to face her greatest challenge yet, managing a global conflict that will determine whether her vision of imperial governance can survive contact with the most sophisticated military and political opposition the ancient world can produce. And the strategies she develops to meet this challenge will prove that her transformation from the brothels to the throne wasn't just an incredible personal story. It was the emergence of political capabilities that will reshape civilization itself. The Persian challenge that emerges in 548 AD is unlike anything the Byzantine Empire has faced before, and it reveals the full scope of King Khosrow's strategic thinking. This isn't just another border war over disputed territories. Khosrow has recognized that Theodora's integration strategies represent a fundamental threat to traditional imperial systems throughout the ancient world, and he's determined to destroy them before they can spread further. But here's what makes this conflict absolutely fascinating from Theodora's perspective. While everyone else is preparing for conventional warfare, she recognizes that Khosrow's real strategy is to prove that Byzantine integration methods can't survive sustained pressure from a determined opponent. He's not just trying to conquer territory, he's trying to discredit her entire approach to imperial governance. Her response reveals the full extent of her transformation from that young woman in Constantinople's entertainment district. Instead of simply mobilizing military forces to meet Persian attacks, she treats this as an opportunity to demonstrate that her reformed imperial system is actually stronger and more resilient than traditional approaches. The test comes when Khosrow launches simultaneous attacks on multiple fronts, stretching Byzantine resources to their absolute limits. Persian forces strike at the eastern frontier while also supporting Gothic resistance in Italy and encouraging tribal uprisings in North Africa. It's a coordinated campaign designed to overwhelm imperial defenses and force Justinian to abandon his expansion policies. Under normal circumstances, this strategy would probably succeed. No previous Byzantine government could have managed military commitments on this scale while maintaining domestic stability and economic growth. But Theodora's reforms have created something unprecedented, an imperial system that actually becomes stronger under pressure. Here's how it works in practice. The investment programs she developed to finance the Italian campaign have created a network of stakeholders who have direct financial interests in imperial success. When Persian attacks threaten to disrupt profitable trade routes, merchants don't just complain to the government. They actively support military operations and contribute resources to defend their investments. The cultural exchange programs she established begin producing unexpected strategic benefits. Young Persians who studied in Constantinople's international schools return home with detailed knowledge of Byzantine capabilities and intentions. But they also return with personal relationships and cultural understanding that make them reluctant to support destructive warfare. Some of these Persian students begin serving as informal diplomatic channels, providing opportunities for negotiation and compromise that wouldn't exist through official government contacts. Others become advocates within Persian society for the kind of integration policies that Theodora has pioneered in Byzantine territories. But the most remarkable development involves something that sounds almost impossible for the ancient world. Italian populations that have experienced the benefits of Byzantine rule begin volunteering to support military operations against Persian forces, even when those operations take place hundreds of miles from Italian territory. This isn't just patriotic enthusiasm or loyalty to imperial authority, it's rational calculation by people who recognize that their own prosperity depends on the success of the imperial system that has provided them with unprecedented opportunities and protections. Take the case of Marcus Italicus, a former Gothic nobleman who initially resisted Byzantine conquest, but gradually became convinced that imperial rule offered advantages that Gothic authority never provided. When Persian attacks threatened to overwhelm Byzantine defenses on the eastern frontier, Marcus doesn't just offer moral support. He organizes Italian volunteers to serve in Persian campaigns, and he contributes significant personal resources to support military logistics. Marcus's transformation isn't unique. Throughout the Italian peninsula, former enemies of Byzantine rule become active supporters of imperial expansion and defense. This isn't because they've been forced or bribed into cooperation. It's because they've experienced firsthand the benefits of Theodora's integration policies, and they understand that their own success depends on imperial success. The cumulative effect of these voluntary contributions is that the Byzantine Empire can sustain military operations on a scale that would bankrupt traditional imperial systems. Instead of draining resources from domestic populations to fund foreign wars, the imperial government is receiving contributions and support from throughout its territories. Meanwhile, Theodora is implementing another characteristically innovative strategy. Instead of trying to match Persian military strength directly, she begins targeting the underlying social and economic systems that support Persian power. Working through her networks of merchants, diplomats, and cultural contacts, she begins offering Persian populations the same kinds of opportunities and protections that have proven so successful in Italian territories. Persian craftsmen are invited to participate in imperial workshops where they can learn new skills and earn higher wages than traditional Persian economy provides. Persian women are offered access to the legal protections and economic opportunities that Theodora's reforms have created throughout Byzantine territories. Religious minorities within the Persian Empire receive support and encouragement to resist persecution and maintain their distinctive beliefs and practices. This isn't just propaganda warfare. These are genuine offers of improved conditions backed up by real resources and institutional support. Persian populations who accept these opportunities discover that they're significantly better off under Byzantine influence than they were under traditional Persian authority. The strategy works exactly as Theodora intended. Instead of facing a unified Persian empire with unlimited resources and popular support, Byzantine forces find themselves confronting an increasingly divided opponent where significant portions of the population are neutral or actively supportive of imperial expansion. But the most brilliant aspect of Theodora's Persian strategy involves something that demonstrates her complete mastery of psychological warfare. Instead of demonizing Khosrow or trying to destroy Persian culture, she positions the conflict as a competition between different approaches to imperial governance. The message she sends throughout the region is simple, but devastatingly effective. The Persian Empire represents the old way of doing things, where rulers extract resources from their populations to fund military adventures and personal luxury. The Byzantine Empire represents a new approach, where imperial success creates opportunities and benefits for everyone within the system. This framing puts Khosrow in an impossible position. To prove that traditional imperial methods are superior, he needs to demonstrate that he can provide his populations with better conditions than the Byzantine alternatives. But traditional Persian systems aren't designed to maximize popular welfare. They're designed to concentrate resources and power in the hands of ruling elites. The result is that Khosrow finds himself trying to compete in an area where his entire system is fundamentally disadvantaged. Every attempt he makes to match Byzantine offers of improved conditions reveals the limitations of traditional imperial approaches. By 550 AD, the Persian challenge that was supposed to destroy Theodora's integration strategies has instead become the ultimate demonstration of their effectiveness. Persian attacks have been contained and repelled, but more importantly, the conflict has accelerated the spread of Byzantine influence throughout regions that were previously neutral or hostile. The success against Persian opposition creates a momentum that carries imperial expansion to levels that even Justinian never imagined possible. But it also creates new challenges that test the limits of Theodora's administrative and political innovations. Managing an empire that now includes territories from Spain to the Caucasus requires administrative capabilities on a scale that no previous government has ever attempted. The legal systems, economic programs, and cultural institutions that work effectively in Constantinople and Italy need to be adapted for dozens of different cultures and geographical conditions. Theodora's response to this challenge reveals the full maturity of her political thinking. Instead of trying to impose uniform systems throughout the empire, she develops what amounts to the first truly federalized imperial structure in world history. Different regions maintain their distinctive cultural and legal traditions, but they're integrated into empire-wide systems for defense, trade, and administration. Local populations retain significant autonomy in managing their own affairs, but they also participate in imperial institutions that provide benefits and opportunities that no local system could offer independently. The result is an imperial structure that's simultaneously unified and diverse, centralized and decentralized, traditional and innovative. It's a political achievement that won't be equaled until the modern era, and it represents the ultimate expression of the vision that began when a young actress in Constantinople's entertainment district refused to accept that her origins determined her limitations. But perhaps the most remarkable aspect of Theodora's mature imperial system involves something that demonstrates her complete understanding of how power really works in complex societies. Instead of trying to control everything directly, she creates systems that generate their own stability and growth through the voluntary cooperation of people who benefit from imperial success. The empire she and Justinian have built doesn't depend on their personal authority, or even their continued survival. The institutions, relationships, and opportunities they've created have become self-sustaining because they serve the genuine interests of millions of people throughout the Mediterranean world. By 548 AD, Theodora has accomplished something that seemed impossible when she first returned to Constantinople from her exile in North Africa. She hasn't just transformed herself from an actress to an empress. She's created political and social innovations that will influence human civilization for over 1,000 years. The legal protections for women that she pioneered will eventually become foundations for modern concepts of human rights. The economic integration strategies she developed will inspire federal systems throughout the modern world. The cultural exchange programs she established will become models for international education and diplomacy. But most importantly, she's proven that individual transformation and social progress aren't just possible, but mutually reinforcing. Her personal rise from the lowest levels of Byzantine society to the heights of imperial power created opportunities for millions of other people to improve their own conditions and contribute to collective prosperity. The woman who once carried costumes for her sisters in Constantinople's entertainment district has become the architect of political innovations that reshape what's possible for human societies. And the empire she's helped create is about to reach heights of prosperity, cultural achievement, and international influence that will make it the envy of the medieval world. But even as Theodora reaches the pinnacle of her political success, new challenges are emerging that will test every aspect of the system she's built. The religious controversies that seemed resolved are beginning to flare up again with renewed intensity. Economic strains from massive imperial expansion are creating inflationary pressures that threaten to undermine the prosperity that makes integration policies politically sustainable. Most ominously, Theodora herself is beginning to show signs of the illness that will eventually end her remarkable life. The woman whose energy and intelligence have driven imperial expansion and domestic reform for over 20 years is starting to slow down, and the question of what happens to her innovations after her death is becoming increasingly urgent. The final chapters of Theodora's story will prove that her greatest achievement wasn't just transforming herself or even transforming the Byzantine Empire. It was creating institutional and cultural changes that could survive her personal limitations and continue influencing human development long after she was gone. The girl who started in the shadows of Constantinople's entertainment district is about to demonstrate that true power isn't about controlling people or events. It's about creating systems that enable other people to achieve their own transformations and contribute to collective progress that extends far beyond any individual life or achievement. The final test of everything Theodora has built comes not from external enemies or political conspiracies, but from something far more insidious. By 548 AD, the empress who once dazzled audiences in Constantinople's theatres is facing an opponent she cannot outmaneuver, cannot negotiate with, and cannot defeat through sheer force of will. She's developing the illness that will eventually claim her life, and for the first time since her exile in North Africa, Theodora finds herself confronting a challenge that her intelligence and determination cannot overcome. But here's what makes this period absolutely fascinating. Instead of retreating from public life or trying to hide her declining health, Theodora uses her remaining time to accomplish something that sounds almost impossible. She begins systematically transferring her political knowledge and strategic insights to a new generation of leaders who can continue her work after she's gone. This isn't just about training successors or writing down institutional procedures. Theodora recognizes that her most valuable contributions to the empire aren't the specific policies she's implemented, but the ways of thinking that enabled her to see opportunities where others saw only problems. And teaching people how to think differently is infinitely more complex than just telling them what to do. Take her work with Helena Palatina, a young woman from a wealthy merchant family who catches Theodora's attention during one of the cultural exchange programs. Helena possesses exceptional organizational abilities, but more importantly, she demonstrates the kind of intuitive understanding of power dynamics that reminds Theodora of her own younger self. The training program Theodora develops for Helena becomes a model for how she approaches succession planning throughout the imperial administration. Instead of just explaining government procedures, she creates scenarios where Helena has to analyze complex political situations and develop strategic responses. Here's a specific example of how this works. Theodora presents Helena with a hypothetical crisis involving religious tensions in a newly conquered territory. Orthodox and Monophysite communities are threatening violence against each other. Local officials are taking sides instead of maintaining neutrality, and the military commander is requesting permission to impose martial law. Most government officials would approach this as a simple law enforcement problem. Send in troops, arrest the troublemakers, and impose imperial authority through force. But Theodora teaches Helena to see the deeper pattern underlying the immediate crisis. Why are religious tensions flaring up now rather than earlier? What economic or social pressures are making people more susceptible to extremist appeals? Which local leaders have genuine influence with their communities, and which ones are just making noise to advance their own careers? Most importantly, how can this crisis be transformed into an opportunity to strengthen imperial authority while actually improving conditions for everyone involved? The solutions Helena develops under Theodora's guidance reveal that she's learning to think like her mentor. Instead of suppressing the religious conflict, Helena proposes channeling it into constructive competition. Let both communities compete to demonstrate their Christian virtue through charitable works and community service. Whichever group provides more effective assistance to local populations will obviously have divine favor, and their theological position will be vindicated through their actions rather than their arguments. But Helena goes even further. She suggests using the crisis as an opportunity to implement some of Theodora's economic programs in the troubled territory. The workshops and profit-sharing arrangements that have proven so successful elsewhere could provide new opportunities for both religious communities, while giving them shared interests that transcend theological disagreements. This kind of strategic thinking represents exactly what Theodora hopes to preserve after her death. It's not just about knowing the right policies or following established procedures. It's about understanding how to transform challenges into opportunities and how to create systems where everyone's success depends on everyone else's cooperation. The mentorship program Theodora develops with Helena and dozens of other promising young officials becomes one of her most important legacies. These aren't just government employees learning to do their jobs more effectively. They're future leaders who understand the principles underlying Theodora's approach to imperial governance. But perhaps her most crucial succession planning involves someone much closer to home. Justinian himself, despite their extraordinary partnership, has never fully internalized the social and psychological insights that make Theodora's political strategies so effective. He understands the legal and military aspects of imperial governance brilliantly, but he's never had to survive in the kind of brutal environment that taught Theodora to read people's deepest motivations. The conversations between Theodora and Justinian during this period reveal the full complexity of their relationship. These aren't just policy discussions between political partners. They're intimate exchanges between two people who've shared power at the highest levels and who understand that their time together is limited. Theodora doesn't try to teach Justinian to think exactly like her. That would be impossible, and it wouldn't necessarily be beneficial. Instead, she focuses on helping him understand when to trust his own instincts and when to rely on the insights of advisors who possess different perspectives and experiences. Here's a specific example of how this works in practice. Justinian is dealing with a complex trade dispute between Italian merchants and Byzantine officials. His natural inclination is to resolve the issue through legal analysis and administrative procedures. The law is clear, the procedures are established, and the solution seems straightforward. But Theodora helps him see that the legal dispute is actually a symptom of deeper cultural tensions between Italian and Byzantine business practices. The merchants aren't just complaining about specific regulations, they're expressing frustration with an administrative system that doesn't understand or accommodate their traditional ways of doing business. The solution isn't to change the law or modify the procedures. It's to create cultural bridge positions where people who understand both Italian and Byzantine business practices can help translate between the different approaches. This addresses the underlying problem while maintaining legal consistency and administrative efficiency. This kind of multi-layered problem-solving becomes second nature to Theodora, but it's something Justinian has to learn consciously. The training process reveals just how complementary their different types of intelligence have been throughout their partnership. Meanwhile, Theodora is also working to ensure that her most important policy innovations will survive potential political changes after her death. The legal protections for women, the economic opportunities for former slaves, the religious tolerance policies, and the cultural exchange programs all need to be embedded deeply enough in imperial institutions that they can't be easily reversed by future rulers who might not share her vision. Her approach to this challenge demonstrates the sophisticated understanding of institutional change that she's developed over 2 decades in power. Instead of just writing laws or creating government departments, she focuses on changing the underlying incentives that drive political decision-making. Take her approach to protecting the legal rights of women. Simply passing laws that give women more legal protections isn't enough, because future emperors could repeal those laws if they faced political pressure from traditional elites. Instead, Theodora creates economic and social systems where women's legal rights become essential to broader institutional functioning. The workshops she established don't just provide women with economic opportunities, they become crucial components of imperial manufacturing capacity. The profit-sharing arrangements don't just benefit female workers, they create more efficient and productive business models that generate higher tax revenues for the imperial treasury. The result is that women's legal rights become economically necessary rather than just morally desirable. Any future ruler who tried to reverse these protections would face immediate practical problems as important industries became less efficient and tax revenues declined. This same principle applies to all of Theodora's major reforms. The religious tolerance policies aren't just expressions of Christian charity, they're strategic necessities that prevent the kind of internal conflicts that could weaken imperial defense capabilities. The cultural exchange programs aren't just educational initiatives. They're diplomatic tools that create networks of international cooperation and support. By embedding her policy innovations within larger systems of practical necessity, Theodora ensures that they'll survive changes in imperial leadership and political fashion. Future rulers might not share her vision, but they'll be forced to maintain her institutions because abandoning them would create immediate practical problems. But the most remarkable aspect of Theodora's succession planning involves something that reveals her complete transformation from that young woman struggling to survive in Constantinople's entertainment district. She begins deliberately creating opportunities for other people to surpass her own achievements and contributions. This isn't false modesty or political theatre. Theodora genuinely recognizes that the ultimate test of any leader isn't what they accomplish personally, but whether they create conditions that enable others to achieve even greater things. And the systems she's built are beginning to produce exactly that kind of exponential progress. Take the case of Marcus Scholasticus, a young legal scholar who begins his career working on relatively minor cases involving women's property rights. Under the traditional Byzantine system, Marcus would have spent his entire career handling routine legal disputes without ever having opportunities to contribute to major policy development. But Theodora's legal reforms have created new areas of jurisprudence that require innovative thinking and creative problem-solving. Marcus's work on women's property rights leads him to develop new approaches to contract law that prove applicable to much broader categories of legal disputes. Within 5 years, Marcus is contributing to legal innovations that go far beyond anything Theodora originally envisioned. His work on commercial contracts creates new frameworks for international trade agreements. His analysis of property rights leads to more sophisticated approaches to taxation and government finance. Most importantly, Marcus is training other young legal scholars who are pushing these innovations even further. The intellectual momentum that Theodora created through her initial reforms is generating new developments that she never could have achieved working alone. This pattern repeats itself throughout the imperial administration. The economic programs Theodora established to help former actresses and slaves are being expanded and refined by people who understand both the original vision and the practical challenges of implementation. The cultural exchange initiatives are evolving into permanent institutions that facilitate cooperation between societies throughout the known that emerged from Theodora's approach world. The diplomatic innovations to religious differences are being applied to international relations in ways that prevent conflicts and create new opportunities for peaceful expansion of imperial influence. By 550 AD, it's clear that Theodora's greatest achievement isn't any single policy or institutional reform. It's the creation of intellectual and cultural momentum that continues generating new solutions to emerging challenges long after she's established the basic frameworks. But this success creates its own challenges. The Byzantine Empire that Theodora and Justinian have built is now so different from traditional imperial systems that it requires completely new approaches to governance and administration. The old handbooks and precedents are no longer adequate guides for managing the complex, diverse, and rapidly evolving society they've created. The solution Theodora develops reveals the full maturity of her political thinking. Instead of trying to write comprehensive guides or establish rigid procedures, she creates learning institutions where future administrators can develop the analytical and creative capabilities they'll need to handle unprecedented challenges. The Imperial Academy she establishes in Constantinople becomes a model for similar institutions throughout the empire. These aren't just schools where people learn existing knowledge. They're research and development centers where scholars, administrators, and practitioners work together to understand emerging problems and develop innovative solutions. The curriculum includes traditional subjects like law, theology, and military science, But it also includes completely new disciplines that reflect the complexity of governing Theodora's reformed empire. Students study comparative cultures, economic theory, psychological principles of leadership, and systematic approaches to social change. Most importantly, the teaching methods emphasize critical thinking and creative problem solving, rather than just memorizing established procedures. Students learn to analyze complex situations, identify underlying patterns, and develop strategic responses that address root causes rather than just immediate symptoms. The graduates of these institutions begin taking positions throughout the imperial administration in 551 AD, just as Theodora's health is declining to the point where she can no longer maintain her previous level of direct involvement in government operations. But instead of creating a crisis of leadership, this transition demonstrates the effectiveness of her succession planning. The new generation of administrators doesn't just maintain existing policies, they begin adapting and improving them in response to changing conditions and emerging opportunities. Here's a specific example of how this works. The Italian territories that were conquered during the Gothic Wars are beginning to experience economic growth that's creating new social and political dynamics. Traditional administrative approaches would try to manage this growth through existing regulations and procedures. But the new administrators who've been trained in Theodora's analytical methods recognize that economic growth is creating opportunities for further social and cultural integration. Instead of just managing the changes, they begin actively encouraging developments that strengthen connections between Italian and Byzantine populations. New trade partnerships are established that give Italian merchants access to markets throughout the empire. Educational exchange programs are expanded to include not just government officials, but also craftsmen, artists, and religious leaders. Most importantly, successful Italian innovations in agriculture and manufacturing are being adapted for use in other imperial territories. The result is that Italian integration, which began as a military and political necessity, is evolving into a model for cultural and economic cooperation that strengthens the entire empire. And this evolution is happening not because Theodora is personally directing it, but because the people she's trained understand the principles underlying successful integration and can apply them creatively to new circumstances. This kind of institutional learning and adaptation becomes the hallmark of the imperial system that Theodora leaves as her legacy. Instead of creating rigid structures that can only function under specific conditions, she's built adaptive systems that become stronger and more effective as they encounter new challenges and opportunities. By 552 AD, even as Theodora's personal health continues to decline, the empire she's helped create is reaching new heights of prosperity, cultural achievement, and international influence. The legal innovations she pioneered are being studied and adopted by other societies throughout Europe and Asia. The economic models she developed are generating unprecedented levels of trade and cooperation between different regions and cultures. Most importantly, the social transformations she initiated are creating opportunities for millions of people who would never have had chances to improve their lives under traditional imperial systems. Former slaves are becoming successful merchants and skilled craftsmen. Women who would have been trapped in cycles of exploitation are building independent careers and contributing to their community's prosperity. Religious minorities who faced persecution under previous regimes are now active participants in imperial governance and cultural development. Young people from throughout the known world are studying together in institutions that prepare them to become leaders in their own societies while maintaining connections and cooperation across cultural boundaries. The cumulative effect of these individual transformations is the emergence of something unprecedented in human history, a truly cosmopolitan civilization that derives its strength from diversity rather than uniformity, that grows through inclusion rather than exclusion, and that creates opportunities for human development on a scale never before achieved. And at the center of this extraordinary achievement is the vision of a woman who refused to accept that her origins in Constantinople's entertainment district determined the limits of what she could accomplish. The girl who once carried costumes for her sisters has become the architect of social and political innovations that will influence human civilization for over a millennium. But even as Theodora's health fails and her time grows short, she continues working with characteristic determination and insight. The woman who transformed herself from actress to empress is now focused on her final and perhaps most important transformation, from active leader to enduring legacy. The last conversations she has with Justinian, Helena, Marcus, and the other people she's mentored reveal the full scope of what she's accomplished and the confidence she has in what will continue after she's gone. The empire they've built together isn't dependent on any single person, no matter how capable or visionary. It's become a living system that generates its own energy and direction through the collective efforts of millions of people who've discovered that their individual success depends on their contribution to shared prosperity. The woman who began her journey in the shadows of Constantinople's most notorious district will soon take her place among history's most transformative leaders. But her greatest achievement isn't what she accomplished during her lifetime. It's what she made possible for countless others to accomplish long after her remarkable story comes to an end. The final months of Theodora's life unfold with a poignancy that would have seemed impossible to predict from her early years in Constantinople's entertainment district. By late 547 AD, the illness that will eventually claim her life is becoming impossible to hide. But instead of retreating into private suffering, she uses her remaining energy to orchestrate what might be her most brilliant political maneuver yet. Here's what makes this period so extraordinary. While everyone around her is beginning to panic about succession and the potential collapse of everything they've built together, Theodora is methodically ensuring that her death will actually strengthen the empire rather than weaken it. She's not just preparing for a transition of power. She's engineering a transformation that will make her absence irrelevant to the continued success of her vision. The key to understanding her strategy lies in recognizing something that even her closest advisors initially miss. The greatest threat to her legacy isn't external enemies or political opposition. It's the possibility that people will see her reforms as personal achievements that die with her rather than institutional innovations that have become essential to imperial success. Her solution reveals the full sophistication of her political thinking. Instead of trying to ensure that specific people continue her work, she focuses on creating situations where abandoning her approaches would be practically impossible and economically catastrophic. Take what happens with the silk workshops that became models for women's economic empowerment throughout the empire. By 548 AD, these workshops aren't just successful businesses. They've become integral components of imperial manufacturing capacity, producing goods that are essential for military campaigns, diplomatic gifts, and international trade relationships. But here's the brilliant part. Theodora doesn't just make these workshops economically important. She structures them so that their success depends on maintaining the profit-sharing arrangements and worker protections that initially seemed like radical social experiments. The workshops that treat their workers as partners consistently outperform those that rely on traditional exploitation models. They produce higher quality goods, adapt more quickly to changing market demands, and generate more tax revenue for the imperial treasury. Most importantly, they've created networks of skilled workers whose loyalty to the empire is based on genuine self-interest rather than fear or obligation. The result is that any future ruler who tried to return to traditional labor practices would face immediate practical problems. Imperial manufacturing capacity would decline, tax revenues would drop, and the empire would lose competitive advantages in international markets that depend on the superior quality and innovation that worker partnership models produce. This same principle applies to every major area of Theodora's reforms. The legal protections for women aren't just moral improvements. They've become economic necessities because women's increased participation in commerce and skilled trades has generated new sources of wealth and innovation that the empire can't afford to lose. The religious tolerance policies aren't just expressions of Christian charity. They've become strategic requirements because the cooperation between different religious communities has created military, diplomatic, and economic capabilities that give the Byzantine Empire decisive advantages over its rivals. The cultural exchange programs aren't just educational initiatives. They've become intelligence and diplomatic networks that provide the empire with information and influence throughout the known world that no traditional system could match. But perhaps Theodora's most ingenious institutional innovation involves something that demonstrates her complete mastery of human psychology. She begins deliberately creating situations where opposing her legacy would require people to argue against their own success and prosperity. Here's how this works in practice. Marcus Patricius is a traditional senator who initially opposed many of Theodora's social reforms. He comes from an old aristocratic family that built its wealth and influence through the kind of exploitation that Theodora's policies are designed to eliminate. Under normal circumstances, Marcus would be a natural leader of conservative opposition after Theodora's death. His family connections, wealth, and political experience would make him an obvious choice for people who want to return to traditional imperial practices. But Theodora's reforms have created a situation where Marcus's own interests are now aligned with continuing her policies rather than reversing them. His family's shipping business has become dependent on the expanded trade networks that result from her integration strategies. His son has married into one of the merchant families that profited from her economic innovations. Most importantly, his political influence now depends on his ability to manage the diverse constituencies that her reforms have empowered. For Marcus to oppose Theodora's legacy, he would have to argue against policies that have made his family wealthier and more influential than they ever were under the traditional system. He would have to convince his son to abandon business relationships that are generating unprecedented profits. Most problematically, he would have to explain to his political supporters why they should give up opportunities and protections that have improved their lives dramatically. The political calculation is impossible to ignore. Marcus's rational self-interest requires him to support and even expand Theodora's innovations, regardless of his personal feelings about their social implications. This pattern repeats itself throughout Byzantine society. People who might have opposed Theodora's vision on ideological grounds find themselves defending it for practical reasons. The empress, who once survived by reading the motivations of hostile crowds, has created a system where opposing her becomes economically and politically irrational for virtually everyone involved. Meanwhile, the international situation is providing the ultimate test of whether Theodora's integration strategies can survive the kind of sustained pressure that would have destroyed traditional imperial systems. The Persian conflict that began as Khosrow's attempt to discredit Byzantine expansion methods has evolved into something much more complex and dangerous. By 548 AD, it's clear that this isn't just a war between two empires. It's become a competition between fundamentally different approaches to organizing human societies. The Persian Empire represents the traditional model where rulers extract resources from their populations to fund military adventures and personal luxury. The Byzantine Empire represents Theodora's innovation where imperial success creates opportunities and benefits for everyone within the system. The stakes couldn't be higher because whichever model proves more successful will likely be adopted by societies throughout Europe, Asia, and North Africa. This is a conflict that will determine the future of human political development for centuries. Here's what makes the Persian War so fascinating as a test of Theodora's vision. Khosrow is an intelligent and capable ruler who understands exactly what he's fighting against. He's not just trying to defeat Byzantine armies. He's trying to prove that traditional imperial methods can compete effectively with Theodora's integration strategies. His approach is sophisticated and comprehensive. Persian forces launch military attacks designed to strain Byzantine resources, while simultaneously offering alternative models of governance to populations that have experienced Byzantine rule. The message is clear. You don't need to accept foreign domination to enjoy prosperity and security. The Persian Empire can provide the same benefits while allowing you to maintain your traditional cultures and independence. It's a compelling argument, and it would probably be effective against a conventional imperial system. But Theodora's reforms have created something that Khosrow doesn't fully understand. The populations that have experienced Byzantine integration aren't just enjoying material benefits. They've become active participants in creating and maintaining the systems that benefit them. Take what happens in the Italian territories when Persian agents try to encourage rebellion against Byzantine rule. Instead of finding populations that resent foreign domination, Persian operatives discover communities that see themselves as partners in a successful imperial enterprise. Italian merchants aren't just trading within Byzantine commercial networks. They're helping to design and improve those networks. Italian craftsmen aren't just working in Byzantine workshops. They're developing innovations that strengthen the entire imperial economy. Italian scholars aren't just studying in Byzantine schools. They're contributing to intellectual developments that advance human knowledge throughout the empire. The result is that Persian offers of independence don't sound like liberation. They sound like invitations to abandon successful partnerships in favor of uncertain alternatives. Most Italian leaders don't just reject Persian approaches. They actively report them to Byzantine authorities and contribute resources to defend against Persian attacks. This voluntary cooperation gives the Byzantine Empire capabilities that no traditional system could match. Instead of having to garrison Italian territories with expensive military forces, imperial authorities can rely on local populations to provide their own defense while contributing to broader military operations. The economic advantages are even more dramatic. Instead of extracting tribute from conquered territories, the imperial government is receiving voluntary contributions from partners who have genuine stakes in imperial success. These contributions don't just cover the costs of governing Italian territories. They generate surplus resources that fund expansion and improvements throughout the empire. But perhaps most importantly, the intellectual and cultural cooperation creates innovation capabilities that give the Byzantine Empire decisive advantages in military technology, administrative efficiency, and diplomatic effectiveness. The cultural exchange programs that seem like educational luxuries have become strategic necessities that produce the knowledge and creativity needed to stay ahead of traditional imperial competitors. By 549 AD, it's becoming clear that the Persian challenge has backfired spectacularly. Instead of proving the superiority of traditional imperial methods, the conflict has demonstrated the overwhelming advantages of Theodora's integration strategies. Persian attacks have been contained and repelled, but more importantly, the war has accelerated the spread of Byzantine influence to regions that were previously neutral or hostile. The success against Persian opposition creates momentum that carries imperial expansion to levels that even Justinian never imagined possible. But it also reveals something that will prove crucial to understanding Theodora's ultimate legacy. The empire they've built together has become genuinely self-sustaining. It no longer depends on their personal leadership or even their continued survival. Here's the evidence that proves this point. When Theodora becomes too ill to participate in daily government operations during the spring of 549 AD, imperial administration doesn't just continue functioning, it actually becomes more efficient and innovative as the people she's trained take on greater responsibilities and begin implementing their own improvements to her original vision. Helena Palatina, who began as Theodora's student, is now managing complex diplomatic negotiations with Frankish kingdoms that want to adopt Byzantine integration methods for their own territories. Marcus Scholasticus, the legal scholar, is developing new frameworks for international law that will govern trade and cooperation between different societies. Most remarkably, Anna Commercia, the former actress who became one of Theodora's most successful protégés, is now training other women in the business and political skills needed to succeed in the reformed imperial system. The workshops and educational programs that began as experiments in social reform have evolved into permanent institutions that generate their own leadership and continue expanding their impact. The pattern is unmistakable. Theodora's approach to imperial governance has created intellectual and cultural momentum that continues generating new solutions to emerging challenges. The systems she's built don't just maintain themselves. They actively improve and adapt as they encounter new circumstances and opportunities. This self-sustaining quality becomes crucial as Theodora enters the final phase of her illness. By late 549 AD, she can no longer maintain the exhausting schedule of meetings, ceremonies, and administrative oversight that characterized her earlier years in power. But instead of creating a leadership vacuum, her reduced involvement allows other people to demonstrate the capabilities she's helped them develop. The conversations she has with Justinian during this period reveal the full complexity of what they've accomplished together. These aren't just policy discussions between political partners. They're intimate exchanges between two people who've shared power at the highest levels and who understand that their individual contributions have created something larger and more enduring than either of them could have achieved alone. Justinian, who initially fell in love with Theodora's beauty and intelligence, has come to understand that her greatest gift was never her personal capabilities. It was her ability to recognize and develop capabilities in other people that they didn't know they possessed. The empire they've built together succeeds because it's filled with people who've discovered that they can accomplish things they never thought possible. But perhaps the most poignant aspect of Theodora's final months involves her relationship with the entertainment district where her story began. The neighborhoods that once symbolized exploitation and desperation have been transformed into centers of legitimate commerce and skilled craftsmanship. But Theodora doesn't just view this as a policy success. She sees it as a personal redemption that extends to everyone who shared her early struggles. In the spring of 548 AD, despite her declining health, she makes one final visit to the workshops and training centers that have replaced the brothels and gambling houses of her childhood. The women working in these facilities aren't just employees. They're living proof that individual transformation and social progress can reinforce each other in ways that benefit entire societies. The conversations she has with these women reveal the full scope of what her life has accomplished. They're not just grateful for the opportunity she's created. They understand that her story represents something larger than personal success. It's a demonstration that no one's origins determine their potential contributions to human progress. One conversation particularly stands out. Maria Textrix, a young woman whose mother worked in the same entertainment venues where Theodora spent her childhood, has become a master silk weaver whose innovations in thread design have improved the quality and durability of Byzantine textiles throughout the empire. Maria doesn't just see Theodora as a successful leader who happened to share her background. She sees her as proof that the skills and insights that come from surviving in difficult circumstances can become valuable contributions to solving complex social problems. The empress who once carried costumes in Constantinople's entertainment district has shown that there's no such thing as wasted experience if you understand how to apply it constructively. But Maria has also done something that reveals the full success of Theodora's vision. She's created her own training programs for young women who want to develop textile skills. And she's structured these programs to provide not just technical education, but also the kind of practical wisdom about navigating complex social situations that enabled Theodora's own transformation. The result is that Theodora's approach to personal development and social reform is continuing to spread through the vision networks of people who understand both and the practical methods needed to implement it effectively. The Empress's influence is multiplying exponentially as the people she's directly helped begin helping others in turn. This multiplication effect becomes evident throughout the empire during Theodora's final year. The legal scholars she mentored are training new generations of lawyers who understand that law should serve human dignity rather than just maintaining existing power structures. The administrators she developed are establishing new institutions that provide opportunities for people from all social backgrounds to contribute their abilities to imperial success. Most importantly, the merchants, craftsmen, soldiers, and farmers who benefited from her reforms are actively working to extend those benefits to their own communities and families. They're not just maintaining the systems Theodora created, they're improving and expanding them based on their own experiences and insights. By early 548 AD, the Byzantine Empire has become something unprecedented in human history, a society that systematically creates opportunities for people to exceed their apparent limitations and contribute to collective progress that benefits everyone involved. It's not just prosperous and powerful, it's genuinely innovative in ways that generate new solutions to emerging challenges. And at the center of this extraordinary achievement is a woman whose personal transformation from actress to empress has become a that will influence human civilization for over a template for social and political innovations millennium. The girl who once survived by reading hostile crowds in Constantinople's entertainment district has created institutions and cultural patterns that enable millions of people to develop their own capabilities and contribute to shared prosperity. As 548 progresses, and Theodora's illness advances, she begins focusing on something that reveals the full maturity of her political thinking. Instead of trying to control what happens after her death, she's working to ensure that the principles underlying her approach to governance become so deeply embedded in imperial culture that they'll continue influencing decision-making regardless of who holds formal authority. The conversations she has with Justinian, Helena, Marcus, and the other people she's mentored don't focus on specific policies or administrative procedures. Instead, they explore the fundamental questions about human nature and social organization that guided her thinking throughout her career in power. How do you create systems that bring out the best in people rather than just controlling their worst impulses? How do you structure institutions so that individual success depends on contributing to collective prosperity? How do you build organizations that become stronger and more effective as they encounter new challenges and opportunities? These aren't abstract philosophical discussions. They're practical explorations of the principles that enabled a former actress to become one of history's most transformative leaders. And the people participating in these conversations are carrying these insights into their own work throughout the empire. The result is that Theodora's approach to leadership and governance is becoming embedded in Byzantine culture at levels that transcend any individual personality or political arrangement. The empire she's helped create doesn't just function according to her vision. It thinks according to her methods and continues developing new applications of her insights. As the final months 548 arrive and Theodora's condition continues to deteriorate, something remarkable becomes evident to everyone around her. The woman who began her journey in the shadows of Constantinople's entertainment district has accomplished something that seemed impossible when she first returned from her exile in North Africa. She hasn't just transformed herself, or even transformed the Byzantine Empire. She's created a new model for human political development that demonstrates how individual transformation and social progress can reinforce each other in ways that benefit entire civilizations. The legal innovations she pioneered are being studied and adapted by societies throughout Europe and Asia. The economic models she developed are generating unprecedented levels of prosperity and cooperation between different regions and cultures. The educational and cultural programs she established are creating networks of understanding and collaboration that prevent conflicts and create new opportunities for peaceful human development. Most importantly, the social transformations she initiated are providing millions of people with opportunities to discover and develop capabilities they never knew they possessed. Former slaves are becoming successful merchants and skilled craftsmen. Women who would have been trapped in cycles of exploitation are building independent careers and contributing to their community's prosperity. Religious minorities who faced persecution under previous regimes are now active participants in imperial governance and cultural development. But perhaps Theodora's greatest achievement involves something that won't become fully apparent until long after her death. The systems she's created don't just solve existing problems. They generate the intellectual and cultural resources needed to address challenges that haven't even emerged yet. The empire she's helped build has become a learning organization that continuously adapts